Hi, got a really big receiver in the shop today. Actually, I've had it a while. I've just been on vacation. This is the first day I've really delved into it. It's a Sansui G8700DB. Big 160 watt per channel beast of a receiver. Well, it would be if it was working. The customer called me up and said, "Hey, it blew a fuse and smoked. I replaced the fuse. It doesn't work." You know, no surprise there. Of course, it never works after you replace the fuse. There's always something wrong. He says that after about a couple minutes or so, it starts smelling funny, which is never good, and of course it doesn't come out of protection. The safely operate light just keeps flashing. If you have any sort of electronic repair experience or engineering experience, you know that this means, of course, that the output stage is cooked. And in the words of Dave Jones, anytime you have this type of problem, don't plug it in, take it apart. And indeed, that's what I've done. As you can see over here, I've got the heat sinks taken off the back, transistors unmounted, and let's see what kind of carnage we have today. Hit the test button. Oh, that's not good. The guts of that transistor have turned into a blob. Anyway, circuitry is relatively straightforward. Got your AM and FM IF board here. There's also the FM stereo on that board. This board is your quartz lock and frequency counter. There's the AM and FM front end. There's the AM antenna. This board here, main rectifiers are there. They're on that board there. We've also got some little smaller rectifiers down in there. Let's see if I can get some light on here. Ah, that's much better. So, main rectifiers. A couple of small rectifiers. There's one. Some little caps. A bunch of fuses. None of those are blown. The fuse that blew was, of course, the main, because it briefly shorted out the line for a second when it blew. I've taken the card cages off for looking at the drive stage. One of these has got some pretty obvious burn marks. This one's actually the good one. Let's see if I can get that lead off of there and unplug this. You'll see that resistor there. This one actually. So you can read the color code fairly well on it. Compare that with the one in the other channel, however, and you'll note that there's definitely a problem. The color code on that one is discolored, and that's because it literally got so hot that it bleached the paint. So we know that something abnormal has happened on the drive stage. We have probably lost these two driver transistors there, and maybe even some stuff in the biasing network. More testing is required, of course. There's a regulated supply board of some sort. This board down here, I believe, is the Dolby FM decoder. Let's see, should see the fabled double D symbol on one of these chips, if we can. Yep, here it is. It's the Dolby FM decoder. Turning the unit around. Before we do that, note that it uses an odd sideways configuration for its I/O. Very strange. The speaker outputs are on the back, though. Let's flip it over, and you see even more boards. Your input selector board right here, tone control board, little volume control board there. Various switches are on that board. Bunch of caps, which I'm going to have to service. This is the phono EQ board. Some more linear regulators. See some Zener diodes in there. Big-ish transistors. Right in here, this little clump of circuitry here is the output filter for one of the output stages. Again, it's duplicated over here, but this board is different. This board houses the protection circuit for both channels, which is a bit unusual. The transistor sockets are up in there. They're kind of hard to get at, but you don't actually have to get at them, because if you remove the heatsink from the back, you can get at the transistors. The complement, well, the original complement is a 2SD551 and a 2SB681 in parallel push-pull. You can see speaker terminals, and you've got one switched and two unswitched AC outlets. As you can see, I've pulled 4 transistors from this section here. All 4 were bad, 2 of them merely shorted, and the other 2 completely blown, with all 3 leads becoming common to each other. I didn't get a whole lot of detail on that, but this is a universal voltage model. You just adjust this little plug here, and you can change your mains voltage, which is pretty handy. I'd imagine this one was sold at a PX or BX somewhere, and one of our servicemen brought it home. It had a little sticker on the chassis that said 220 volts, so I'm assuming it was bought in Europe and then brought back. A pretty big IC there. That's the frequency counter. Anyway, what I'm going to do to this unit, I'm going to, of course, repair that output stage. And since the owner wants to keep this thing for decades to come, I'm going to change all the electrolytic caps so he never has a problem with it, ever. I'm also going to check all these little boards to make sure none of them have cold solder joints. I found some questionable soldering in this unit. I love these receivers, they're great, but I think the older G series were a little bit better with the build quality. I personally own a G7000, and I think, despite it being half the wattage, I think it's put together a little bit better. Not a whole lot better. This is still, don't get me wrong, this is still a really good receiver. But I think the older G series were put together just a hair better. The soldering was a little bit better, the connections were a little bit better, the chassis was a little bit nicer. I mean, it's minor stuff, but yeah, you can definitely see the build quality took a little bit of a backseat on these. But anyway, I'm going to take this one apart more, generate a parts list, and contact the customer with his final price. Stay tuned.